And of course, we know the Republican Donald Trump is also in Michigan trying to woo voters to make him the 45th president of the United States of America. We'll get what he's been saying shortly, but I have in the studio with me an African raised in America, Dr. Kenita Gross. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Doctor, and thank you for joining us on Newsdesk.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So you just watched Hillary Clinton there in North Carolina giving at least her final speech before the polls in the next few hours. From the message you got, you saw, did you get any signal at all of what the fate of blacks could be if she wins the elections?
You know, I don't think it's fair enough to draw from that, you know, what the fate, if you will, of what we could be. But our fate is always in our own hands when it's all said and done. And I think that's the important thing for those of us Africans around the world to not lose sight of. Mm.
Yes, but at least the message she got, do you think that she offers something for the American community that, you know, people should say that in the next few hours when the polls open, I'm going to vote for her?
Yeah, I think she definitely offers at least hope for people that there is a possibility for folks to come together and to not only make the country a better place, but to provide a safe space for people to be who they are. So there is that hope there. And then, of course, from that point, you know, we'll see. Time will tell. Mm.
Now, one of the main concerns from the black communities or the colored communities is what sort of discrimination they're going to face, whether Hillary, especially those who are expressing fears based on the presidency of Donald Trump. They are saying that based on his pronouncements, they fear that they could be discriminated against or some of them could be deported. You were raised in America. Before we talk about whether or not there is some legitimacy in what Donald Trump has been saying or the fears being expressed by these people, what was the experience like being raised in America as a black person?
Well, you know, at the risk of sounding just really cliche, I'm getting ready to sound really cliche. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. You know, there were moments where it seemed as though the quote-unquote American dream could be yours, and then there were moments where it was abundantly clear that that was not going to be the case. And so it was one of these situations where you would take 7 steps forward and 8 steps backwards, or 10 steps forward and 5 steps backwards. So there was always this experience of constantly worrying about whether or not you're going to make it, always looking over your shoulder, always worrying. So you become hypervigilant, and hypervigilance becomes the order of the day.
So you're talking about 7 steps forward, say 4 steps forward and say 7 steps backwards. In which areas? Could it be in education, employment, specifically which areas?
It could be everywhere. You wouldn't know. So for instance, you know, there's so many reports where a judge might be walking in his neighborhood and get stopped by the police and harassed by the police. You know, white supremacy is something that has never ended in America. It's just that with different administrations, it's either inflamed or it's quelled a little bit.
So for you, what sort of experiences did you have that made you feel that I'm being treated this way because I'm colored?
Well, my experiences reached across all aspects of life. It was in academia. It was in the experience, very common, of being followed around in the store when you know there was no cause for you to be followed around in the store. It was in the experience of those moments of just outright aggression where someone shouts some racial epithet at you and you're just standing in line to go to a theater or something like that. But it was also being denied access to certain things. You know, I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and so there were things that I didn't have access to then that people have access to now, or if the access was there, it was extremely difficult as opposed to just challenging and competitive.
So for instance, were there some schools you desired to go to, but because of your color, you were told, no blacks allowed here?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was some of the case. And then there were even things like membership clubs. For instance, you could use the example of an athletic club, for instance. You know, you're driving down the street and you think, oh wow, that place looks really nice. Let's go and see if we can play tennis there. Let's go and see if we can go swimming there. And it just wouldn't be possible. Mm.
How does that make you feel, having to grow in such environment?
You know, in the beginning I was angry. And that was my first experience. I was just really angry. And then from there, and everyone's experience is different, but from there, it was just sadness, a lot of sadness. And then from there, it began to shift. The more I began to learn about who I am and where my people come from and the contributions that we've made to civilization, the more I began to feel sorry for people who are white supremacists and who ascribe to those ideologies.
So for you, is it a matter of knowing who you are, and how does that contribute to how you feel when you're seeing all of these things happening?
Oh yeah, it's huge.
Yes.
It's
How?
huge.
Yes. How do you go about it?
How do I go about
Yes.
coming to feel that way?
Yes, and having to deal with it. Now, what usually happens is that sometimes people become very violent because of how they are being treated, and so they are defensive and all of that, even at the slightest provocation. So for you, how did you deal with it? And you mentioned a very important factor: knowing who you are.
Yes, there were moments where I dealt with it really well, but you know, there were moments where I didn't. But I think overall, the more I became immersed in and focused on who I was, the more it gave me direction to go, and the more it spelled out for me important next steps that were not counterproductive, but in fact very productive. And so it steered me, I think it steered me away from that. But there were moments where I didn't fare so well. It's too much.
We'll come back to this conversation shortly, but I was saying earlier that Donald Trump has been in Michigan also trying to, you know, hear what, also trying to tell people what they should consider in terms of voting for Donald Trump to be the 45th president of the U.S. Let's continue with the discussion here in the studio. I still have with me Dr. Kenita Groves here with me. First of all, your reaction to what Anna just said.
You know, I can appreciate where she's coming from. You know, she's using these words. I felt fear, I felt angry, I felt sad, I felt offended, you know. And when you look at a lot of the things that Trump has been saying in his campaigns and in the marketing ads, it makes perfectly good sense. And when she talks about not necessarily voting for Hillary, but voting against Trump, it makes perfectly good sense. I really can appreciate, as a person of color, where she's coming from.
And before Anna, we also watched Donald Trump there, his final speech. What message did you get from what he said?
Well, you know, the message I get from what he's saying is that he's speaking code. He's speaking a coded language, you know, talking about, you know, finally get our country, and talking about real change.
What coded language means what to you?
I think what he's talking about, in all honesty, and I think his constituents know that he's talking about getting back to a white America, a white-owned or white-dominated America, and I think that's that coded language coming through.
Now, before we watched these two, we were talking about what sort of discriminations are in place against the colored people, and I wanted to know specifically from you as a colored person, has there been an instance where, for instance, you wanted a job and you were discriminated against because of your color?
You know, there have been a lot of instances, and one that just comes to my mind in this moment was a victim service agency that I was working at many years ago. And in the States, I enjoy African clothes. I always wore African clothes, whether I was testifying in court or doing whatever. I was just having African clothes on, and for me, it was professional. And the professionality of my African clothes had to do not only with the type of fabric that I chose, but the style of the outfit that I was wearing. And on this one particular occasion, a job that I had just got hired for, I came in to report for my first day of work, and they told me, okay, but you cannot wear ethnic clothes except on Friday. And I said to the HR person, I said, well, that's impossible because everybody wears ethnic clothes. Everyone's clothes is from some ethnic group. And the woman retorted back to me angrily, I'm not going to argue with you. I'm just telling you what the rules are. You're going to have to wear ethnic clothes or else. So I asked to speak to the director. And when I went in and shared with the director what had transpired, I then asked him a strange question. I said, do you mind if I look at the label on your shirt? And to my surprise, he allowed me. And it says, made in Italy. And I said, this isn't ethnicity. Everything we wear is made from somewhere on the planet. It's impossible to not wear ethnic clothes. So he conceded, and I was able to wear my African clothes.
Dr. Kenita, I'll come back to you for your final words, but let's get some other perspectives on this. I'm joined on the line now by Professor Keith Bluey. He is an international relations expert. Good morning to you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Great. So I want us to look at the candidates in this particular election, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. Do you think that both candidates are getting fair support from their parties?
Do I think that what?
Both candidates, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, are getting the support that presidential candidates need for this particular election?
Of course, they both have the support. But there is a problem with Donald Trump. He seems to have lost the confidence of his political party, the Republican Party. I mean, the bulk of the leadership of the Republican Party have distanced themselves from him. He seems to be an enigmatic character, a strange character in American political history. He comes around to talk about a new world order, which is based on factionalism, isolationism of a very bad type. There is going to be discrimination against non-Americans in America. And around the world, he is attacking or opposing, squeezing out the Muslims. He has identified them as terrorists, as enemies of progress. Therefore, he says on the one of entering the White House, he will order that visas for Muslims or those coming from Muslim countries should be stopped, should be suspended. And it means that no more Muslims will enter the United States of America. He will expel all the 2 million illegal, assumed illegal aliens in the United States of America and build a wall around the boundary with Mexico so as to stop the Mexicans from entering America. He has no good intention towards blacks in America and the world at large. And he tends to show admiration for President Putin's autocratic dictatorial ways of going about things. He tends to disdain the American system of debate and consensus and thinks that the electoral system is very much rigged towards one candidate, and that he will not recognize the results unless he wins.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Keith Bluer. He's an international relations expert. And let me have some final words from Dr. Kanita Grooves. We've been talking about discrimination all this while, but I do know that in 1969, the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights was passed in Costa Rica, and a court was set up to ensure that such, nobody is discriminated against based on color, based on language, based on sex. And this is clear there in Chapter 1, the Article 1 of this particular convention. What is the challenge in accessing this to ensure that you operate on a level playing field?
Well, I think the challenge is for affected people who have been aggressed against, to take their issue to a world court. It's time to move from marching in the streets and complaining to Supreme Courts or local courts and really turn it into an international issue.
Thank you very much. Dr. Kanita Grooves is an African raised in America. We'll be back shortly, and sports will be up next.